All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and kick off this webinar. So today we're going to be talking about people management. So as people continue to filter in, I may announce this again, so I apologize if I repeat myself. But we're going to talk about people management and deputy today. We'll be focusing on premium. Enterprise is largely the same, but there are some added benefits there. Just for the sake of time and for the group, we're going to focus on premium today. So let's look at who I am. So I'm Jordan Mack. A lot of you, I recognize some names on here, so I've actually worked with quite a few of you, but I have been with Deputy about 3 years now. I'm a senior account manager, and I handle a lot of the enterprise accounts that we work with within Deputy. So let's look at what we're going to cover today. So first, we're just going to look at the people screen. So what you actually see when you get into the people screen and what you can do there. We're going to look at adding and archiving employees and what that actually means. And I'm also going to talk about deleting briefly, even though it's not something we typically suggest. We're going to talk about editing employees. So down the road, if an employee has a change made to them, how to go in there and edit that. We're going to talk about employment details. This part's really important. These are things like their pay rates or their leave conditions or what state they're in, that kind of thing. We're going to look at viewing employee info, which sounds obvious, but it's a little different from adding and editing employees. So we're going to look at what you can do there. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end if we have time. I will try to answer questions during this webinar. So we'll look at that real quick. When you want to ask questions, there is a Q&A box on Zoom. So if you ask questions on there, I will try to type the answers back to the best of my abilities. If we have time at the end and there's something that I can actually show, I will do that as well. But just for the sake of time, we may run up on time here. The video I recorded is about 40 minutes. So I did record a video because that allows me to also answer questions rather during this. So I can't show you stuff live until we get to the end, so keep that in mind, but I'm happy to try to answer live if I can. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into this. I'm going to turn my video off, my sound, so you can't hear me. I'm going to play the video, and I'll look for any questions coming in through the chat. Thanks. All right, so we're going to start with what you first see when you get into the people screen. So when you come into Deputy, you click on the People tab up here. This is what you'll be presented with. So we're going to go through first what you actually can do on this screen, what you can filter for, what you can also show, that kind of thing. So I am in our demo environment. You can see I've got almost 1,100 people. So this is a very large database we're working with. Most of you will probably have a smaller subset, but all of this applies the same way. So the first thing we'll talk about is the ability to filter. So as I look through this, I can either search for an individual's name, so I could search for myself, and I probably have a handful of accounts in here just for testing purposes. You can search that way and filter out who you want to see. You can also filter by several different things. So I can say I just want to see people at a certain location, or I want to see people who have a certain level of access. And if you had custom levels, they would also be shown here. I want to see just people that are employed is the default. So these are people that are currently active in Deputy for your account, or people that are archived. So if you're looking to bring someone back, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, this is how you would bring them back, by unarchiving them, but first finding them through archived. You can see certain training tags. Let's say I want to see just people who have a cashier training. I could type that in, and the back behind here will filter out just people that have a cashier training. I can look for several. You can do the same for leave. So people who have vacation leave or holiday PTO set, you can look for people that have that set up if you're looking for a certain particular leave type. And then invitation, these are just different statuses of invitation. So people that have been invited but haven't accepted yet, people that already accepted, declined, or you have not sent an invitation yet. A lot of times customers will load up all their employees and send all the invitations at once. So these are people that have not been sent an invitation yet. Stress profile, again, these are a bunch of custom ones, but you'll have at least 7 or 8 in there by default that you can filter for. And then timesheet export code. So if you're looking for just employees that don't have an export code yet, you can filter for those individuals. And then finally, if you have training expiration, if you set an expiration date on someone's training, let's say they have a point of sale training that renews every year, you can see what people that are coming close to expiring, so you can quickly see if they need to go through that process of training again. All right, so now back on this main screen, you can also see that it added this training because I searched for this training tag and filtered for cashier. So let me turn that off. That's a good segue into the next thing I want to talk about though. So this is the ability to show different things on this screen at once. So let's say I want to see everyone's main location. I can check this and their main location will come in. So now I can see everyone that's at Harsh's Catering or Lake Point Care. I can quickly see what location they belong to. Now remember, people can belong to more than one location, so you may have several here, but this is going to be the first location in that list, which is going to be their main location. Let's say I want to see everyone's training tags, which is what we did earlier. Now I can quickly see what trainings everyone has. If I wanted to filter out a certain one, I could again go back in here and say I want to see cashier training. And back here it would show me just the individuals that have the cashier training. So that's helpful if you're looking for an individual that can fill a role, or you need to renew a training, that kind of thing. It'll show that. You can also see their timesheet export code. This is obviously very important for payroll. So if you're exporting to your payroll company, this is going to be the number that they identify the employee by. So it's important that everyone has one in most cases, unless they're doing it by first and last name, which most don't. So in that instance, we want to make sure everyone has a timesheet export code. Again, this is our demo environment, so most do not. But in your case, you'd probably want to make sure that everyone has a timesheet export code before you actually kick off Deputy and start integrating with your payroll company. And then if you wanted to see things like leave balances, I'm not going to have a lot in here because, again, this is our demo environment, but you could also see everyone's vacation time, leftover, holiday time, whatever you call it. That would show here, so if someone wanted to quickly get an answer on what their leave balance was, you could pull that up and see it. The other thing on the screen I do want to talk about are these bulk actions. These are really powerful. So if there's something you want to apply to everyone at once, there's a quick way to do it. So let's say that these top 3 people all have a cashier training. What I can do is click this bulk action, and you can see everything I can do here. So there's a lot of things I can change here. So I can add a location to their profile. I can set an access level, so I can make all of them a system administrator at once. I can set a stress profile. I can add a training, which is what I'll do now. Setting rate, so if everyone had the same pay rate, then I could select, the 10 people that all make the certain amount of dollars and put that in all at once instead of having to go into each profile of each person. I could send a quick message to all of these people, so I could quickly just send a message to them. I could set their leave balances. I could add a new leave type, and then I could archive all of these people. You can see that these 2 options are deselected because I cannot unarchive these people because they're not archived, and I can't send them invitations because some of them have already been invited. So let's do a training. I'm just going to go with cashier. So I'll type in cashier. I will save that. And now those 3 people will have a cashier training. So for things like setting up trainings, or things like setting rates or stress profiles, bulk actions is really powerful. It's really fast. It enables you to do things a lot quicker than going into each employee's profile. So definitely keep that in mind as you begin to roll out Deputy and you want to make adjustments to groups of individuals and not necessarily go into each user's profile. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is adding and archiving employees. So if I click on this button in the top right that says Add People, I have 3 options that are presented: Add Single Person, Add Import Multiple People, and Advanced CSV Import. I'm not going to touch on these 2 today. Add Import Multiple People is just going to give you a list of boxes, and you can input everyone's information all at once. So if you want to add 25 people at once, that may be faster. And then Advanced CSV Import is the ability to supply a CSV or Excel file, and Deputy will ingest that. You have to map the fields and tell it where you want certain fields going, but it allows you to import all their data so you don't have to key it in individually. But for the sake of this, I want to actually walk through adding a single person because that's where I actually present all of the data. So I'm going to click on Add Single Person. So there's 2 things you can do. If you invite them with a link, what you can do is copy this link, send it to them in an email, a text message, however you communicate with your team, and they can input all this information themselves outside of a couple of things like employee access, things like that you set. But this will allow them to self-serve all of this information. But let's go through the route as if you aren't doing that. So I'm going to do mine. I'm going to set myself up. I'm going to add webinar to the end just so I can differentiate myself here. I can give myself a preferred name. So let's say my middle name is James. Let's say I prefer to go by that. I can do that. So that way it'll show up everywhere. on the employee profile when they're looking at it, when you're scheduling them, that kind of thing. If they prefer to go by a different name, you can have that listed here so that way they're actually going by what they prefer. And you can see everything that's required is indicated by these red stars. So we'll touch on those briefly as we go through this as well. So worksat, everyone has to have at least one location. So you have to have one location you're tied to. Remember that I said earlier that the first location on this list is the one that's considered their main location. So let's say I want to do a hardware store, which is one that I typically work with. So that is a hardware store east. Let's say that I work at some of the other hardware stores though. I could also set these up, and this would allow me to be scheduled at any of these locations. So in this scenario, I can be set up to any of these locations. I can be scheduled here, but my default main location is hardware store east. But again, that doesn't stop you from being scheduled at west or south. It's just my main location is east. So remember that when you're looking at the ordering of these. For email address, this has to be a unique for each employee. So I'll show you what happens if I try to do one that I've already gotten here that's my email address. We use this as our unique identifier so that everyone has to have a unique email address. So keep that in mind. Mobile is not necessary. It's good to have in there, but you don't have to have it. If you want to use text messaging, if you want your schedule alerts to go out through text, things like that, you need to have one, but it's not necessary, so I'm not going to put mine in here. But just remember, I'm putting an email address in here that already exists because I'll show you what that looks like. The next tab is job information. So I'm telling it what type of employee I am. By default, when you first come in deputy, you'll have employee, supervisor, location manager, and system administrator. You can see we've got a test one in here just for purposes of testing. Some time down the road we tested something, but you'll have those four by default. That's the most common. So I'm going to say this person is going to be an employee. Stress profile is how often they're allowed to work within deputy without a manager override. So you can see there's a bunch of default ones set up in here. The most common one we'll find is this, either the standard 40 hours, 8 hours per day, or just the standard 40 hours all day. And the only difference in these two is that the standard 40 hours, 8 hours per day will try to limit that employee to working 8 hours a day, whereas the standard 40 hours all day will not limit them to 8 hours per day, but it will try to limit them to 40 hours a week. The only thing this affects are things like auto scheduling. If you use auto schedule, it's not going to allow you to schedule them, or it's not going to automatically schedule them over these amounts. And if you're doing things like shift swapping, let's say I'm trying to swap a shift with someone, and I'm trying to swap my 4-hour shift for their 8-hour shift, but I'm already at 38 hours for the week. It's not going to let me do that because the stress profile is telling it to limit their hours to 40 hours. So you can scroll through here. There's a handful in here by default. I think there's probably 7 or 8 in here by default. Depends on how you want to set it up. Like I said, most commonly are going to be these two. You do have some people that say 24/7, which is anytime, all day, every day, this person can be scheduled. Just know that this doesn't actually drive your overtime. All this does is limits the scheduling. So overtime is done on the back end through employment terms and stuff, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But this is going to try to limit your schedule to try to align with how you want to schedule them. So I'm going to do this 40 hours a week, all day. And then again, training tags. So we touched on this briefly earlier, but when you actually go to schedule people, what you'll probably have set up is certain areas within deputy that have training requirements. So you might say, if I want someone to work the point of sale today, they need cashier training. If someone's working in, again, I'm doing a hardware store, so if someone's working in the paint department, I want them to have paint mixer. I want them to know how to use that machine. So basically what this does is the training tag that I'm adding to this employee needs to align with the training requirements on the area that we're going to set up. We'll do this through another training, but you set up training requirements on an area, and if those two align, it allows that employee to work in that area. So again, this goes back to kind of like we talked about with the stress profile. You can override that. So if someone doesn't have a paint mixer training, you can override that and say, I don't care, just put them in there. But for the most part, you want them to have the training aligned with the area they'll be working in. And an individual can have more than one. So I could have paint mixer and cashier, so I can kind of swap in between the two roles throughout the week. But just know that if you are using training requirements on areas, you'll also need to align those on the employee as well. All right, profile photo. I'm not going to upload one now. The only reason that this becomes important is one, it looks nicer, quite honestly, when you're on your schedule or when they're on the app. It looks nicer to have a quick reference point to know who someone is just by looking at their profile photo really easily. But also, if you are using a kiosk and you're doing the whole take a photo when someone signs in, there is an integration on the location side that says if the person clocking in doesn't match the photo, notify the manager. And that's in the event that someone's clocking in for someone else. Let's say that I'm clocking in for a buddy of mine because he's coming in late to work. If the kiosk takes a photo and realizes it's not me or it's not my friend, it will alert the manager. And the way it does that is by the profile photo. So if that's something that you want to enforce, you need to have your employees upload a photo. We don't actually do a comparison ourselves. We use an Amazon service that compares the photo for us, and it does things like distance between eyes and eyes to nose, that type of thing. So it's not doing an extreme view of the photo, meaning that if someone grows a beard, that's fine. It still works fine. But again, if you're going to enforce the photo piece of it or the kiosk photo taken, you need to have your employees set up a photo here. Next is contact information. This is pretty self-explanatory, but if you need to know where someone lives, so if you want to send out letters, you want to send out gifts, or obviously an emergency contact is always important. That kind of thing is what you want to fill out here, and that's just more of a reference point for you as a manager or owner. Employment details. So let's walk through this. So you can set their employment type to any of these. You can see we've got a lot of them repeated. Again, this is our test environment. You'll typically have these three. These don't really drive much of anything. It's more for you in terms of categorization. So most people will keep these at full time. But if you want to be able to identify who's part-time and who's casual, meaning they may work one day every 2 weeks, or they're retired, but they come in from time to time, feel free to do that. I'm going to keep mine on full-time. The pay rates, so by default, it's going to be kind of the standard issue of 40 hours plus time and a half. So this is what's going to actually drive how your employees get paid overtime, when that kicks in, that sort of thing. So what we're trying to move to is we really strongly suggest that people use their state labor laws. So if I'm in here and I type in Georgia labor law, you'll see that it shows up. And it asks me what my daily rate is. So I'm going to say my daily rate is $12. And if I click this button right below it, view all rates and allowances, you can see that for my weekly overtime, I'm getting $18 an hour. And then on holidays, I also get $18 an hour. So each state is in here. Most of them are pretty standard, meaning it's going to be the same as what you just saw. You'll see some of them have other rates. So Colorado can have consecutive day overtime. California is a great example because California has a lot of labor laws. So if I do my $12 an hour in California, you'll see that there are a lot of different ways I can get different rates. So 7th workday, daily overtime, so on and so on. And so you'll see that we really prefer you to use your state labor laws, even though that 40 plus 1.5 is the default. We really strongly suggest that you come in here and select the state labor laws. Even if you don't have any labor laws, so again, my example of Georgia, even if you don't have any strict labor laws right now, if Georgia was to ever roll out more labor laws and we update those on the back end, you wouldn't have to come in here and reconfigure that because you already have it set as Georgia. So just to future-proof yourself, it's a good idea to go ahead and set your pay rates to the labor law of the state that you're in. All right, so the other thing we have, which is pretty new, is pay by area. So we had the ability to say when Jordan works in certain areas, he makes more than when he works in other areas. So let's say when Jordan works as a cashier, he makes $12 an hour. Let's do the same thing. Makes $12 an hour. But when he works in paint, following Georgia labor law, he makes $14 an hour. So this allows you to say if he works in certain areas, he makes more or less money. You don't have to set this up. If you don't want to do pay by area, that's fine. You can just do the static pay regardless of where this person works, which is more common. But if you do want to break that down and give people incentives to work in certain departments, you can do that as well. Timesheet export code, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but this is, again, really important. This number will come from your payroll system. So when your payroll system asks, how do you identify this person, they should be able to supply you with a code. You should be able to go into their system, whether it's ADP or Paycom or Paycor, whoever, and pull a list of your employees with this code. And you would just type this in here, and that will also refer again on their payroll export. So when you actually go to export, this will be identified there. So this is new. You can see it says introducing agreed hours. This is really neat. So basically you can say when someone works a certain time frame, let's say starting Monday, and it's probably going to be standard across your entire organization, but some people do have several work periods. But let's say every week starting Monday, I've agreed to have this employee work 25 hours. What this means is that it kind of, if you use auto scheduling, it's going to try to give this person as close to 25 hours as possible. If you're doing manually scheduled scheduling, it will identify on the left-hand side on the panel if the person's over or above those 25 hours. So it's a quick indicator for you to say, oh, Jordan was expecting to work 25 hours this week. He's only got 22. I need to try to give him a shift. So this is typically if you have either a contract or a verbal agreement with someone that says, hey, if I bring you on, I'll give you 25 hours a week. You want to stick to your word. So this is just a tool to help you keep yourself in alignment with those hours. Again, completely optional. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to. You can wipe it out. But it is a neat little thing we've added. And then leave entitlements. So leave entitlements are just what type of leave, what types of leave can this person take, or what are they entitled to? For instance, if they're an hourly employee, they may not get annual leave, vacation. They may not accrue that, but they do get sick leave. You can also select down here, they get Christmas off. Again, these are our demo database, but they have jury duty. They can take jury duty leave off. Some people like to bucket very specific leave types into, again, jury duty or Christmas holiday or whatever you want to do. Some people just like to do everything as either sick or vacation because one accrues and one doesn't. Completely up to you. If you want to add very specific dates, you can. If you want to be very broad, you can do that as well. So just keep that in mind. If I click this button here, it'll put in whatever is the default. You can see it says if you change the pay rate type, this button will enable you to add back the current leave types. So depending on your pay rate type up here, your employment type, you can set on the back end and full-time employees are entitled to these leaves. And if I change that and click that button, it would give the full-time leave entitlements back. So finally, under the other screen, you can do things like their gender, which you can actually hide as a manager or owner. You can say, I don't want this displayed. I don't care. Or you can say, you can actually have them choose this. You can put in their date of birth. So you can say they were born, when I age myself, well, let's see. Actually select my birthday for the sake of data integrity. And then let's say I was hired a couple months ago. So April Fool's joke. I was hired on April 1st. So once you fill all this information out, again, you can set up all of this with the bare minimum if you want. So a lot of people, if you remember, the red dots indicate what's required. There's only a handful of things that are actually required. If you noticed as I go through here, the only things that are required to set up an employee are these 3 things. And if you want to invite them, there has to be an email address. So keep in mind, you can set up everyone with kind of a bare minimum profile if you're loading everyone to begin, and then come back later and add all this information. Completely up to you. So now this button down here, it's a little hidden. Let me hide. Oh, I can't move that. So the save and invite button back here, if I click this, spin for a second, and it's going to go try to invite me, and you'll see it says that this email is not unique, so I can't invite myself. So what I'm going to do, just for the sake of this, is add a little extension to that. And now it should allow me to be invited. All right, so it invited me now. I got an email. So you'll see now it says that I'm invited to deputy, has all this information listed. And on the back end, you can see it's identifying me as James. because that's what I put in as my preferred name. But if I go in here and edit this profile, which is how you get back to this screen, you'll see it actually still has my name in there. So that's how you add an employee. You can see now it says I'm invited, and everyone will have a different indicator down here. If it says nothing, that means they actually accepted the invite. They're actually already employed. You can see no invitation sent, invited, no invitation sent. If I find someone that actually has nothing, as it thinks, if I find something that says nothing, that just means they've already accepted their invite and they are already employed. See if I can find one. Again, we have so many individuals in here. I'm filtering on cashier, that's why I didn't get much. There you go. So if it says nothing underneath it, that just means that they have already accepted their invite and there's no need to do anything. So let's talk about archiving employees real quick. So let's say that I want to archive an employee. They are no longer with us. So archiving is one step before deleting. So archiving is not the same as deleting, but in terms of deputy, it's basically the same thing. It means you stop paying for that employee, but we do retain all of their data. So if there's ever an instance that they may come back and work for you again, we strongly suggest you just archive them and don't delete them. To archive them, on the right-hand side here, you see I have two options. I'm just going to click on the options button and click archive employee. You also have the ability to resend an invitation. So if an employee says, hey, I didn't get the invite, you can resend it just to bring it to the top of their inbox again. But I'm going to archive this employee, and it's telling me that it will revoke his access to this organization. So I'll archive this employee. There are times, and I'll show you real quick, that an employee may have things like an outstanding schedule, or they have outstanding timesheets that you need to action before you can archive them. So here you go. So it says this employee cannot be archived because he can be archived, but he has active records in the system. So you just want to be aware of the fact that this person has some actionable things that need to take place before you can actually, or should archive them. And there are times that it won't let you archive an employee. Let me see if I can find one. If they do have things like an active schedule, or they have things that will limit you from archiving them. So let me show you. I don't see anyone that's actively scheduled. Okay, there we go. So this employee cannot be archived because he's scheduled for shifts. So basically, you need to action these shifts before you can archive this employee. So I need to go in here and do something. If I click view, it'll take me to the schedule. I need to action these before I can actually archive this employee. So let me take you one step further. Pull up James again. So I need to change the status. I need to filter out to archived. There's that employee that I archived. There's two of them. So the next step is to delete. Just be aware that if you delete an employee, there's no getting them back. They're gone for good. So again, it's listed as an option in the system. It's kind of buried because we typically don't want people doing it. Even if you never think you're going to work with this employee again, it still might be helpful to hold their data. So we strongly suggest you don't do this. I'm actually not going to do it for the sake of this, but it is there as an option if you just absolutely have to get their data out of your system. So that is adding and archiving employees. All right, we're going to talk really briefly about editing employees. We're not going to go very deep into it because we've already covered basically everything that's on that screen. But the question does arise often of if someone's pay rate changes or something else changes, how do I action that? So let me filter out of archived employees. Let me actually show you now that I'm in here. If you ever want to bring someone back, let's say this employee that I just archived, I can unarchive them, and it's going to allow me to change their email address here. So let's say this person's email address changed since I last worked with them. This allows me to change their email address to say it's no longer JMac plus webinar, it's JMac plus webinar 2. And you can unarchive them, and that allows you to invite them back, and you can see they go away out of the archive screen. And I just got another email that says you're invited to work here again. Okay, so there's a couple ways you can get to the edit screen. The first way is just hitting this button on the right side and hit edit. It'll bring me straight back into the screen I was in. Or I could simply click on the employee's name and click edit profile in the top right. So again, not going to spend a lot of time on this. Let's say I want to change their mobile phone number, or I want to add their mobile phone number. The most common things we have people come in here to do are to change their training requirements, or training tags rather, to change their position. Let's say they got promoted to a manager, or to change their rate of pay. Other than that, most people don't ever come in here to actually change anything. So let's click on job information. Let's say that I also got trained on, let's see, I did paint and cashier. Let's say I got sales training, so I can now be a sales associate. So I now have the ability to do sales training. Now let's say that I took a sales class, and as a owner of a store or manager of a store, you required that, but it's a yearly class. It's some kind of certification that I got that I want this employee to go back and get once a year. What I can do is hit this button right below it, and it says the training name, the training date. Let's say this employee got trained. I got trained on the 1st of July, and it ends the 1st of July next year. I can upload a file, so I can say here's the certificate. I can put a comment in here. I can put a comment that says what type of training it was. But in any regard, when I save this, I can get an alert when the training's coming to expire. So if this is like a technical training that they have to do on an annual or quarterly basis, or every 2 years or whatever, it'll alert you when they're coming up close to being done on their training. So that way you have the ability to get notified and action that before that training actually expires. Training expiration dates are completely optional. It's just for things, like I said, that need a certain type of certification. You can see it says I have it with that checkbox, so it's still valid. When it's not valid any longer, that will go away. So the other thing, like I said, people come in here and edit are going to be things like their pay. So let's say this employee changed from $12 to $14 an hour. You just come in here, update that, and save it. As quick as that. That's really, again, the only time people will come in here, unless state changes or whatever, which isn't super common, or if their leave types get changed as well. So something to keep in mind. Don't come in here often to edit, but it is possible. Also, do want to point out, I'll show you real quick. Let me go accept the invite. When an employee accepts an invite to join your store, you are no longer able to edit their email address. And the reason is, again, we use that as their unique identifier. The employee can still change it, but the manager or owner cannot change it. So let me show you what I mean. So right now, if I go into this employee's profile, because I have not yet accepted this invite, I still have the ability to edit this screen here. But watch what happens when I accept my invite. Sorry, I'm just loading it up on a different screen. So let's see if that went through. So what it did is when I accepted the invite, it updated it to my actual name because I have a profile in here. So you can see it updated my name to match what we call our global profile. So this is the same person. You can see by the training tags here. So if I go into edit this now, you can see that this is now grayed out. And the reason being, you can see the owner can change their email address on mobile. You can click Y to get more information. But basically, just for security purposes, we don't allow the owner to change the profile email address. Again, the employee can do it themselves. The only way around that, as you saw earlier, is if this person is not scheduled for anything yet, or they don't have any timesheets, I can archive this employee. And then when I go to unarchive them, it does allow me to send their invite to a new address. So that's one workaround to keep in mind. If you do archive them and unarchive them, you don't lose any data. But again, if they have things like schedules out there, you have to action those first before you can unarchive them. So just something to keep in mind. It's a common request we get. So just keep that in mind as you work through this. Okay, so the last thing that I want to touch on really briefly is viewing things within an employee's profile. So we talked about editing, adding, deleting an employee, setting training tags, that kind of thing. But we haven't talked about what you can actually view within their profile. So let me pull up someone that I know has some data. Bobby is someone that I work with here. So I'll pick on him. So if I click on his profile, you can see everything we've touched on in the top has been in the top right, the edit profile. But you can actually view a lot of things from this employee's profile as well. So you can see I've got a few options here along the top. The bottom piece is just the same data that we already put in before. So that should be more of an informational gathering for you. But I have three options here along the top for this employee. I can message this employee, which it'll go to my newsfeed and give me the ability to send a message to Bobby. So I won't do that because it'll jump me over to the newsfeed. But if you're familiar with that piece, it will be pretty apparent to you how that works. So just send a message to him. I can send his login details to him. So if he forgets how to log in or he forgets what his username is, for instance, I can send those to him and I'll email it to him. And then I can do a journal. So some of you probably are not familiar with journals. Journals are just a way to categorize how an employee's activities are. So let's say that someone does something really great for a customer and I want to remember to praise them for that during their annual performance review. Or they do something terrible and they forget to clean up constantly, so I'll make a note every time they forget to clean up. A lot of people use these for things like annual performance reviews or quarterly reviews, that kind of thing, or just as call outs to people to say, hey, you're doing a great job. So if I click on journal, you can either do it from here or you can do it on a timesheet. So let's say that on a timesheet you want to remember the day that this happened. You can do it from the timesheet as well. So I'm going to say Bobby had a great interaction with a customer this evening. I can either set a category of positive or negative, or I can leave it neutral if I want, if it's just more of an informational type thing. I'm going to say this is positive and I'm going to save it. And I'll show you where that goes here in a second. So along the left-hand side, you can see that I can start a shift for Bobby. So he's unscheduled today. So if he was scheduled, it would actually tell me where he was supposed to work. But let's say Bobby came in for his shift and someone had broken the tablet and they dropped it and the screen cracked. So Bobby can't log in. As a manager or administrator, I can log in for him. So I can say, start this unscheduled shift or start the shift that he's scheduled for. So there's gives you some ability to do some administrative work for him. And then along the left-hand side, we have all these different tabs. Let's look at these real quick. So shifts is just going to tell me where he's scheduled to work in the next little bit. So you can see on the 28th, 29th, and 30th, he's actually scheduled to work from 9 to 5 today. I can replace him from here if I want to. That'll jump me over to the schedule screen and I can replace him. Timesheets obviously are shifts that he's already worked. You can see that these are the shifts that he worked in the past couple of weeks, or I can keep scrolling down and it'll keep loading more. So these are all of his timesheets, and you can see the status of them if I need to approve them or if they're pending, so on and so forth. I can also see things like the break details. He did not take a break, but if there were break details, they'd be shown there. If I clicked on this button up here, I won't do it, but it'll actually take me over into the timesheet screen. So I can either approve it from here or I can jump over to the timesheet and approve it from there. Unavailability are going to be, if Bobby had any unavailability, it would be shown here. So if I wanted to edit his unavailability or delete it, or again, as an administrator, I could add unavailability for him. So I can say, Bobby cannot work the 30th because he has a dentist appointment, or he can't work on Fridays. Let's say he can't work every Friday because he's going back to school or he picks up the kids those days or whatever the case may be. I could add unavailability for him. It's typically better if the employee does it themselves because they have ownership of it, but if you want to control that as a manager or owner, you can. Leave, you can see Bobby's leave. These are the requests he has in there. They've all been declined. Here's his balance. You can see that he has annual leave vacation, 80 hours remaining, 9.4 days. And as I scroll through, you can see what was requested in the past and what was approved and what was denied. And you can actually view that and add a new one if you want. So again, from an administrative standpoint, you can kind of own that as well if you don't want them putting in their own leave request. I'm going to jump into journals now, which is going to be what we talked about earlier. So here are all of Bobby's journals. You can see that you can see the message if it was a happy one or sad, or one of these which is neither. It gives you the ability to quickly scroll through here and say, hey, this Bobby had a overall favorable year, or opposite, he had a negative year. And then there's also reporting based on this. So if you go into reports, there is actually a journal report that'll give you this kind of in a more breakdown, roll up type sense. So something you can view as well, but it's nice to have it right here on the profile. And then finally, there is the newsfeed, which is every post that Bobby has made, and it goes from what's most recent to what's oldest. So you can see who he sent them to. Because I'm an administrator, I can see all of these. But if Bobby and I were coworkers, meaning we're both employee levels, and Bobby sent a message to another employee level or an administrator, I could not see that. I can only see stuff that's directed at me, unless you are an administrator, and then you can see everything. So keep that in mind. The only reason I'm seeing all of this that Bobby sent to different people is because I'm an administrator. So it's just peace of mind there. So that wraps it up. I appreciate the time, and I will do my best to answer whatever questions we have coming in the Q&A section.
Okay, so that wraps up the video portion. Let me try to get out of this without replaying it, which I always do. Yep, as I just did. So let's go over to Q&A now. I see a few questions that have come in. Let me see if I can answer them live. There's one thing I want to touch on. Someone asked a good question about training. So I want to touch on that. So what I'm going to do, and Jake just asked, are employees able to see the journal entries? Quick answer on that one, no. The employees cannot see their own journal entries. A manager can see anyone below him or her, but the employee themselves cannot see their journal entries. So you can use that for things like I said, like for annual reviews or whatnot, but they can't see those. So let me pull over our training database. I think you should be able to see this. I'm hoping you can. I can't see what you can see, but I'm hoping you can see this. So someone asked about the ability, how does training tags play into actually scheduling people? Or if you're trying to fill open shifts, how does that work? So this training only covers people, but I will touch really briefly on how those training tags tie into scheduling. So you can see, let me start on the location side. Let me go back into my hardware store and pull up an actual location, the same one that I talked about earlier, which is this hardware store east. So if I look at my areas within a location, you can see I've got these departments or areas that people can be scheduled at. You can see that my paint department has no training requirements at the moment. So if I click edit beside my paint department, and let's say that I want people to have paint mixer training in order to work in this area, if I put that requirement in there and save it, then save my area, if I go back into the people tab, which is what we just talked about, which was the training tags, there's two different things. One's called training requirements on the location side. On the people side, it's called training tags. So a little bit confusing, but they align with one another. So let's say I want to filter out people that just have paint mixer training. There's only one person, and it's just me. So I'm, in theory, the only person that without a manager override can work in the paint department right now. So if I was to go schedule someone else, it would pop up and say this person's not available to work in this area. This person's not trained. I'm the only one that can work there. So those training tags tie to the training requirements on the area, and that's how they tie into it. So one person did ask, Tawny asked, can I add more trainings to my list of trainings already there? That is a free form field. So if I go into an employee and I want to add a training tag that doesn't exist here, you can literally just type it and press enter and it'll create it. So if you want to, there's a button here that says add new training. You can do it that way too. But the easiest way is you can type in any gibberish word, press enter, and it'll take it in as a training. Just remember that has to align on the location area side in order for it to do anything. So I got the question, can HR admin restrict everyone, including managers, from viewing the journal entries that HR admins see it only? I believe you can, yeah. My understanding is yes. I would ask our support team before I give you that full-fledged answer, and I'll also get someone to follow up on that because I don't want to give you bad data if that's obviously going to have an impact. do be aware that system administrators have full view to everything always. So even if we are able to restrict it from managers, your administrators will also be able to see that no matter what. So just keep that in mind. But I'll get you a for sure answer and someone will follow up with you. All right, and I will see if any more questions come through. So Jake asked if they have a shift lead that works under me, are they able to edit the journals for employees? Is there a setting I can turn on if they cannot? So you can edit a journal for anyone underneath you. So if I'm a manager, I cannot submit journal entries for other managers, but I can do it for employees. So in the hierarchy goes employees report into supervisors, supervisors report into location managers report into system administrators. With that hierarchy, everyone below them I can submit and view journals for. Everyone on my level or above, I cannot. So Brent asked, how can a location manager become independent deputy with the same package? I don't fully understand that question, Brenda. I apologize. But if you have some more context around that, I'm happy to try to answer. So someone asked, is there a way for deputy to auto schedule during busy work hours during the day? So you can turn on auto scheduling. We have a whole nother webinar on that. I won't go into it on this because it'll take a full hour just to talk through that. But there is a way that you can click a button and deputy will look at things like your trends and busyness, your past schedules, and it'll build you a schedule. You can also do things like import your sales data. So we can pull in sales data from your historical times. We do this for some other retailers and schedule based off what we forecast your sales data is going to be today. So we do have a video on that. I did one a couple months back. So if you go to the training website, you'll see it there, or reach out to someone on our support team. We can help you with that. But yeah, you can definitely have deputy auto schedule for you. Stephanie asked, is there a training session that focuses on leave? We actually did one. I think it was either last month or the month before. So if you go to deputy.com/training, it'll be listed there, and you can click on view past trainings, and that's one of the most common ones we get. So there is one in there. So Jason asked, to send a group communication, would the team need to be currently scheduled, or can the communications be sent out for review? They don't have to be scheduled. You can see, I'll go to newsfeed because this is a real quick one. Basically, you can create a post, and you can either do, I can do the entire hardware store again. So I could send a newsfeed post out. I'm not going to post it because a lot of people get a notification, but I can send a notification out to all 105 people right now if I wanted to. They don't have to be currently scheduled or anything like that. So Brenda, I think you're referring to having someone be fully aware of how the system works and feel comfortable with it. Correct me if I'm wrong. I would suggest you reach out to myself. I'll give my email address at the end of this if you have some feedback surrounding that. It probably sounds like you need a package of training for your managers, but I could be wrong. So just reach out to me and let me know if you want to follow up with that. I can have someone reach out to you. Christine said, as for people access, what is the limit of supervisor access for people management? So that's set up by you. So it's really up to you. By default, I believe they can do things like schedule employees, but they can't do things like change pay rates or go through and change employment details. The only thing they have the ability to do is write a journal for them and schedule them. Amy asked, can HR see all journals to assist with reviews? It depends on how they're set up. So we don't have a certain bucket of employees or access level called HR unless you want that. And if you want that, support can help you set that up. But basically, it depends on how you have it HR set up. If they're set up as a system administrator, yes, they can see all journals. And that's commonly what we do. And there's also, I didn't go into this and I won't spend much time on it. There's also a report called journal usage. So if you wanted to see everyone at once, I could go in here, click this journal usage button, and it would tell me I've only got mine in here because I have just these few days selected, but everything that I've reported on, here's all of Bobby's for this date range. If I went back further, I'd have a lot more. So this report just gives you the ability to say, hey, let me look at Bobby's journals for the past 3 months or whatever. And you can see they're all in here. And you could use this report. It's kind of bare bones, but it gives you the ability to quickly see everyone's journals without having to go into their employee profile. So, and again, you can also go into the employee profiles if you'd rather. Any other questions? I'll give it about 30 seconds. If we don't get anything, I'll wrap it up. We're coming up on time anyways. Okay, I guess we'll call it there. I appreciate everyone's time. If you have questions, reach out to our support team. My email address is jmack, Jmack, @deputy.com. I don't have a ton of availability like support does, so definitely use them as your first line of defense. But if you have questions referring directly to this webinar, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks. Have a great day.